Want awesome tabletop games delivered right to your door? Sign up now for Gamebox Monthly. Learn more at GameboxMonthly.com.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Elaborates. Thank you so much for tuning in. I got to talk a little bit about those of you in New York. My feature film Pinch is coming to the Long Island International Film Expo on July 15th. Check that out. More details to come. Today I'm sitting down with my bestie. You know him, you love him. He's the Bert to my Ernie, the Ben to my Jerry, the Dale to my Chip, the light-haired double dragon guy to my dark-haired double dragon guy. Sitting down today with Paul Bianchi. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Jake.
How's it going, buddy?
Good.
Thanks for sitting down with me yet again. It's been a little while. You came out the gate in this podcast, appearing quite a few times. And it's been now a couple months.
And then I faded away like the smoke.
Like the smoke? What smoke?
The smoke.
Just smoke in general?
Uh-huh.
You're the smoke. Okay, fair.
Well, so I'll elaborate on that since that's what we do. My dad's stepdad was someone who would talk about all the ladies in his life in his older age as he was a bachelor in the later years of his life. And he talked about this one woman in particular who he said, she comes in like the smoke. And so sometimes I will still say like the smoke because of that.
Would he say it constantly?
No,
just one of his sayings.
He mentioned it one time, but
you hung on to it.
But I loved it that much. Yeah,
it's nice. I like that. Comes in like the smoke and leaves like the smoke.
Leaves like the smoke.
I'm gonna start using that.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you bring up your father's father. You said that was your grandpa. Is that what you said?
Yeah, my grandpa. He's and my dad called him dad, but he was not blood related.
Explain.
Well, my grandmother got divorced to my dad's dad, and then
Gotcha.
And then my grandpa Joe came into the picture, and he is the father of my aunt Paula.
Gotcha. Okay, so he's your dad's stepfather technically, but he
Yes.
calls him dad, and
Yeah.
your aunt is your dad's half sibling.
Yes.
Gotcha. But yeah, speaking of fathers, it is Father's Day this weekend. If you're listening to this in any sort of timely fashion, or if you're listening to it in the future, there's a possibility that it's Father's Day this weekend as well, depending on when you chose. I mean, technically, it's always going to be Father's Day eventually.
Yes.
In recent episodes of the show, I've had conversations with people like Pierce Cook, Sarah Oliver, like Joe Crandall.
I know none of those people.
Brian Finifter. And it seems to be a theme for the last month or so here on the show, in the way that fathers have sort of steered people in certain directions, whether it be with aid or with the lack of aid. Sometimes the imprints left on them were extremely small or extremely large. Pierce spoke about how his father passed away when he was 6, and he knew of him through photos and through all of the family and everybody who loved him dearly. Inversely, Brian Finifter, who was on last week's show, spoke about how his father passed away when he was just 4, and how he has literally zero emotional connection to the person he knows as his father, because there was not enough time for him to either make an imprint or for whatever the case may be. And in both instances, I have shared a little bit of my situation and the father issues that I have. You have the exact opposite situation than me. And I thought that since it is Father's Day, maybe I would have you back on as my closest friend, and maybe talk with you a little bit about how fathers have played a role in our lives so differently.
And myself being the liaison of having a good father who is still in my life.
Yes, of the Norman Rockwell painting of father and son. Maybe even better than that.
I forgot that we posed for that, but that was great. Yeah.
Yeah, you and your father have a really exceptional relationship.
Mm-hmm.
One that I'm quite envious of. You guys take trips together. You guys, I don't know anybody out here in Los Angeles whose father comes to visit as much as you. Who, like, I've seen your dad more times in the past year than I've seen members of my family in the past decade.
And of course, there's the postcards as well.
Postcards? What do you mean?
I get a postcard from my dad probably on average once a week.
Once a week, your dad sends you a postcard.
Yeah, and I'm going to say on average because I know it's been like, I didn't get one for 3 weeks, but then this week I got 2, you know.
Where are these postcards just from places he's going and he's been, or?
Yeah, I mean, my dad's career takes him all around the country, and it's not like I'm the only one who's getting postcards. Like, he has other pen pals. People know him as like, oh, he still sends letters. Like, he's a postcard person. And my dad, I think, sort of revels in this role and his title.
Okay.
And he has boxes of postcards at his house.
So when he travels, he's just constantly buying postcards so that he can, when time needs, have this, like, so he has like a cache of postcards.
And because of that, I'm fully aware of that it's actually becoming less and less common to be able to find postcards.
Oh.
Stores often do not sell them.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah, I guess if you think about it, unless you're like in a place where there's tourism,
yeah,
where are you going to see postcards? Like, unless you're on like a beach town somewhere in the South.
And that's exactly where he wants to get them when I've been present.
Right.
It's like, oh, we're here in Brownsville, Delaware, you know, like the most like random small town. And then he's like, do you guys have postcards at like the market on the corner? And they're like
the solo store on the street.
Like, what is a postcard? You know, but that's what he wants. He wants it to be, it's the one that says greetings from Brownsville, Delaware.
Like
I don't know if
like when you think of a postcard in your head, that's what I think of. I think of like, it's the name of a place in a sort of comic book-esque cascaded font, and it always has a picture of the thing that's popular there.
He is, however, particular about like what sort of image it displays, and I think he likes sort of an eclectic mix. Like, if he doesn't want just like horses running on a beach, like he likes it if it's like specific to the area that he's visiting. So it's like I'm just trying to think of like historic Abe Lincoln home, but I was trying to think of like someone more eclectic than Abe Lincoln, like something that they would have, like here's the Nikolai Tesla house.
Sure, yeah. I was gonna go who's the aviator?
Amelia Earhart?
No, the male aviator. Everybody. God damn it.
Charles Lindbergh?
No. This is all getting cut out.
Well, no, you got to keep Charles Lindbergh.
He
flew the Spirit of St. Louis.
Literally, I'm pretty sure that Leonardo DiCaprio played him in a movie.
Oh,
Howard Hughes.
Howard Hughes, yeah.
Howard Hughes. I was thinking like a Howard Hughes home or that sort of thing.
Yeah, you should cut that out.
Okay. Anyways, so what does your father do that he travels so much?
My father is involved in the field of physical rehabilitation. And it's sort of like, I don't know if you remember, you used to watch Friends a lot, right?
Yeah, when it was on, like I wasn't like
there's an episode where they try to explain what Chandler Bing does.
Right.
It's slightly less nondescript than that, but I do have a problem to this day describing to people what my dad does.
Okay.
He's involved in he's a consultant, and he travels to places where there are physical rehabilitation programs,
sure,
and assists them in figuring out how to do their jobs better.
Is it more of a like office procedural style thing, or is it specifically about the rehabilitation itself? Does he have a medical knowledge?
He does. He has he's not a doctor.
Okay.
But he knows how the program in hospitals should be best run.
Gotcha. Okay, so it is more of a probably more of a procedural sort of thing. Interesting. Has he had this job since you were a kid?
Yeah, but it's been a long journey from he began as a social worker in Northern California, and then he slowly this job sort of quickly sort of snowballed and evolved.
Gotcha.
and changed, and he found himself in a different place in his career than he ever thought that he was going to be when he was first starting out.
Gotcha. So the reason why I asked about that was because I was trying to get at, was your father around when you were young? Because if he was traveling so much for work now, was he traveling as well when you were a kid?
Yeah, no, yeah, he would leave very often, and so it became the sort of thing where my mother was the primary caretaker most of the time,
Okay.
and then my dad would come home and be home, 2 or 3 nights, and then would be
Right.
off, and so I think that definitely helped.
Make him sort of the fun superhero
Yeah,
guy?
he
'Cause
was-
he was never the disciplinarian.
He was not often the disciplinarian, and it was always like, yay, dad's home. Like it was an event. It would, like, we'd all gather in the door leading to the garage, like, oh, he's about to come inside.
Right,
and,
right. It was an exciting event when dad was
Yeah.
home. And he was a great dad as far as like super attentive, super like playful. You host a show on this podcast network called Myth Understood, all about Greek mythology, which is an interest that your dad handed you essentially because
Yeah, he had the Dolares's book of Greek mythology, and I remember laying on the ground of the floor of his office and flipping through that, and he would read it along with me, and
Right.
we would. It also, I think, it probably helped teach me how to become a better reader,
Right.
and a better cold reader. I mean,
Sure.
reading aloud, making me understand context quicker.
And was he passing interests onto his own interests onto you, or was he more of like, oh, I think he likes this? Like, did you show an interest in that sort of stuff first?
I definitely think that there was an exchange there,
Right.
because he would introduce several things to me that are of interest to him, and I either took to it or I didn't take to it. And for instance, cartography.
Okay, sure.
We share an interest in that. My dad has had maps on the wall
Right.
of his office in the house, and we would spend time drawing our own sort of fantasy maps.
Right.
And I was much more into the fantasy than he was.
Right.
Like he tells me all the time that once a story involves a non-human character, he is less inclined to become
Right.
emotionally invested. Whereas I'm like, yeah, give me the crab person. Like,
Yeah.
he sounds.
That's where you went, crab person?
Yeah.
This is the Isle of the Crab People.
Exactly. Like, I was trying to think of, like, the most repulsive sort
Sure.
of human animal hybrid.
No, you nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Mhm.
Is the crab, especially if they're like crab from the bottom up, like legs of a human being, and then from the top half, just a crab.
Yeah, I was thinking about, like the weird crab mouth, like they just have
Ugh.
it. Yeah.
All right. Anyways, so
Um,
you and your cartographing, is that a thing?
Yeah, but then, he was also, my dad's a baseball fan. I
Okay.
did not pick that up from him.
No.
But I played a lot of badminton with him, and we
But he was super attentive. Bottom line, to you and
Yeah.
you and your sister. You also have a sister as well, older sister.
older sister,
And
yeah.
and like, was there ever anything about his childhood that he sort of handed off to you? Because if I'm not mistaken, you once told me that your father and myself don't have dissimilar stories.
Yeah, his own father left and was out of the picture at a very young age for
Okay.
him. I guess the difference being is that then my stepdad, or his stepdad,
Kinda
came in and
Pretty quickly, like when was his stepdad around when he was young?
yeah, his stepdad
Gotcha.
was around when he was still young, but there was a period of time where he was fatherless
Right.
in the 50s, when it was sort of weird to be fatherless.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So again, I've touched upon that on a few episodes, but my relationship or lack thereof with fatherhood in general is that my father left when my mom was pregnant with me. And there are varying stories of her kicking him out and him not being there because he didn't want to be, and all sorts of bullshit. But the bottom line is he wasn't around. He took off. I met my father for the very first time when I was 9 years old. And he was a cowboy. He owned a ranch upstate New York. And when you're 9 years old and, your favorite movie is City Slickers, and you meet your dad and he's a cowboy, you don't go, where have you been for 9 years? You go, oh shit, I have a dad and he's a cowboy. And so at 9 years old, all of a sudden everything was all fine, and all of a sudden I had a dad again. But obviously that was very short lived. That only lasted about a year and a half before I never saw him ever again. But as a child, growing up without a father, I always sort of felt pitied, and I feel like as kids you pick up on that sort of stuff, and I always felt like I was the kid without a dad, and that sort of behavior is sort of taught, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And the thing is the irony of it is that I wasn't without. I mean, I had my older brother, I have aunts and uncles, and I had an abundance of women. I was raised by the coven, is what I call them, a series of women. My mom, my 2 older sisters, my godmother, my Auntie Anna, this woman Rose Crawford, who was sort of a caretaker that I had, and then my dad's ex-wife, which is a thing that always confuses people.
Yeah, that is unusual.
Well, my mom and my dad met. They both had kids already. And so my mother did have a stepdaughter, my sister Celia. So that's kind of how it worked out. Well, my dad took off. Celia's mother, my dad's ex, and my mom became best friends. To this day, they're still best friends. So they're like the ex-wives club. My mom actually said to me on the phone just today, she said to me, who would have thought after all these years that me and Sue still good friends? And I was like, yeah, no, it's great, And then she took a moment. She goes, if that was the reason your father came along, was to bring us together, if that's what I got out of it, then you know what? Not a bad deal. And I'm thinking like, hey, you know what else you got out of it, Mom? You kind of got a son out of the deal too, but I got second billing to Sue. Thanks for that.
I like how you qualified yourself with a kinda. Kind of a son.
Kind of a son. So that was my situation. My mother, I never felt without. Growing up, being a Boy Scout, my mom was always on all the Boy Scout trips. She was the only mom chaperone the majority of times. And we would do trips. We'd go upstate to the Catskills in New York, and we'd have these big long hikes or these camp trips. She was always the one that could do it. All these guys had like their old dads who were always cranky and sore and didn't want to do anything. And my mom was a fucking trooper. My mom and I were the first ones up, Slide Mountain in the Catskills. I remember that. And camping trips, also baseball, like playing baseball as a kid. My mom was the one that was out there. She was the one that was screaming at the umpires. And she was the one that was driving me to practice and all that sort of stuff. There was nothing that I feel I really severely missed by not having my dad around, with the exception of maybe that, like, this is how to be a man, if that makes sense. Like that most people think that they get from their fathers. Where in actuality, I think I got the majority of that from, from the village that it took.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a lot. There's an idea that what you get from your dad is like, this is how to shave, this is how to do inherently manly things,
This is how to be a gentleman to women or to this or to that. Yeah, that sort of stuff.
But I learned, I would say equally from both of my parents, how to be a decent human being.
Exactly.
And because they are both very different people, I was able to pick and choose from my mom and my dad which qualities I found most important to me to try to pick up off their traits.
Sure.
And as we were all human and we were all flawed, which traits to avoid or try to avoid.
Right.
And that's tough because it's ingrained in you.
Yeah. And, there's never a part of me that doesn't, when I think about what shaped me, that I don't think about that I don't wonder what life would be like. You can't help but wonder. Inversely from that, something that I've been gripping with lately is just knowing that my mother she's turning 68, 67 this year rather. My father was older than her by quite a bit. And I've been thinking a lot about like, what happens when my father dies? What do I feel then? Because at this point, the ball's been in his court for years. I'm not a hard person to find. I'm on the internet. It's not, if he wanted contact, if he wanted a relationship, there's literally nothing stopping him.
What was life like when he was back in the picture for a little bit?
So I met my father in family court, which is a thing that I sort of regret that my mother did. But my mom brought me to like family court, which isn't a great thing. That's not a great way to, I was a prop. I was there to be put in front of a judge and him and be like, look, this is what you did, that kind of shit. With that said, like I said earlier, I was just excited. I was just like, there's a guy who's a cowboy and that's my dad. As a kid, there's not a lot of trepidation there, I don't think. He's got a ranch upstate New York with a bunch of horses, and I have 2 little brothers. And like, that's all I needed. I was in.
Yeah.
He invited me to come stay with him for the summer when school was out. And I handed it to my mom, despite probably everything in her will to say, fuck that, let me go. And I'm very appreciative of that she wasn't like, screw you, like she was like, all right, fine. You want to, spend some time with him? Sure. So I went and I stayed upstate, and it was great. I mean, from what I remember as a 9-year-old, like I rode tractors. He had like 11 acres of property. He had a dude ranch where people would come and ride horses, like tourists, not tourists, but out-of-towners would come, and city folk, would come and ride horses. I was 9 years old and he let me lead the horse trails out with people because the horses knew where they were going. It really didn't matter.
Yeah.
But it was a blast. I loved going up there. And then that year he was around, like as around as you could be living, 6-7 hours away. Like he came to one of my baseball games. And so the second summer comes and I'm going to go do it again. We're going to go back and stay with him again. And for whatever reason, I'm fuzzy. I'm really fuzzy on this. You said to me once before, when we talked about my bad memory, that like, oh, I think you suppressed some stuff. And if I do, it's this summer. It's the second summer with my dad. I don't know I don't know why I was unhappy, but I do remember calling my mom up and being like, can I come home early? And I just, for whatever reason, that second summer, something happened, or I was uncomfortable for some reason.
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't be surprised if maybe it was I don't know if they ever got married, but his wife, the mother of his 2 other kids, my 2 little brothers. I knew that she was very persistent in me calling her mom. And I don't know if that really, because I was definitely a mama's boy, again, I was raised by a single mother. Like, I don't know if that's really kind of what made me uncomfortable. Whatever the reason was, I asked if I can come home early. My mom was like, absolutely. And I came home early. And that was the last time I ever saw him.
Interesting.
And it wasn't that like my mom cut contact or anything like that. He was still open and available to come whenever he wanted. And that was it. I just never saw him. So I go back to being a teenager after having my dad for, 1.5 years or something like that. Go back to being a teenager, go back to being a kid, grow into a teenager, go through high school, go through all the ups and downs that you go through kind of discovering.
Without wondering why your dad wasn't contacting you?
Yeah, I'm sure that I was sad about it and bothered by it, but there was just an acceptance level, I think.
Yeah.
There was just that level of like, well.
And there wasn't any desire to be like, hey, wait, like I should contact him.
I can't admit that wasn't the case, but I think, and we've talked about this on a couple of previous episodes with certain guests, how like a lot of the things that you feel are intrinsically taught to you. Like they're like, intrinsic wasn't the right word I was looking for, but they are, provided to you by point of views of others. And I'm not going to say that my mother did things wrong, but because again, she allowed this to happen for those couple, she allowed him to have an opportunity to have a relationship with his son. But if I had an interest in reaching out, it was suppressed by the reiteration of screw him, he's an asshole, he's an awful person. Do you mean that was reiterated to me time and time and time again? If that makes sense,
despite you not seeing that personally when you were visiting him.
Yeah, as far as I remember, and again, 9-10 years old, like
yeah,
and so I'm jumping around a little bit here, but my older sister from his first marriage, Celia, she had a different experience than I did. She got to have him around until she was 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah,
he was there. He raised her for 7 years. And she'll even tell you to this day, he was never a bad dad.
Huh.
When he's around, he's the life of the party. He's funny. He's charismatic. He's not a bad person to be around. He's just a dumb guy who makes dumb decisions and can't handle responsibility. And that's sort of what I garnished from that, like, so I wouldn't be surprised if at 10 years old, he was like the greatest person, like 9 or 10, as far as like, being entertaining, being dad, that kind of stuff. What? You made a face just now. What are you thinking about?
Because you said garnished, and I believe you meant garnered.
Garnered, yeah.
Yeah.
Garnished. No, I just threw some I threw some celery on the side of it.
I was trying to invent a way where that would be an appropriate word, and I was like, nope.
I probably have constantly said garnished in place of garnered. It's like, what's the other word that I always try to say? Gawkish and
you say mind-numbing instead of mind-blowing.
Yeah, I do say, or no, mind-numbing versus
mind-blowing is what you say.
Blowing?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought there was another term. That boggling is the other word I use.
Oh, yeah, mind-boggling and mind-blowing are like the same thing.
Anyways, we're talking dads here,
Yeah.
and that's mind-numbing enough. In any case, when I left New York, I'm 22 years old. Out of nowhere, I get a random phone call. I just moved to Pensacola, Florida for some reason. I get a random phone call. Hey, is this Jake? Yeah, this is Jake. Jake, this is your father. I heard you wanted to talk to me. And so that was already sort of like, I was upset because that was a cop out to me. You know what I mean? Like, how did you hear that? Nobody, so we had a conversation that was extremely emotional at that point. I explained to him that I left. He told me what my younger brothers were doing as if we were close family members, like, oh, well, Cody went and did this and Jesse went and did this and blah, blah, blah. He told me that if I needed financial help to let him know. Like, what is that? What? It was just very weird. He asked if I would send him some photos. I was like, sure, whatever. And I hung up the phone with him, and I called Sue and my mom. I called some other people and had conversations, and I chalked it up as like, screw him. It wasn't until maybe 3 or 4 years after that the girl that I was with convinced me, like, listen, why don't you just send him something? Like, it wasn't as much as that might have been a cop out, the whole you wanted to talk to me thing. Yeah. I'm sure it was hard for him to pick up that phone, and I admit that. And so I wrote him saying, like, sorry, this took 4 years, but here's the photos you asked for. And ever since then, I never heard from him ever again. So I don't know if he ever got that. If he didn't, who knows?
Yeah.
That's sort of the daddy issues that I carry around, is sort of that, like, I never needed them there as far as I'm concerned because I had so much. But it wouldn't have been bad to have a fun dad around, And also there's the underlying things of you went off and had 2 children, afterwards that you raised till that you've stayed around forever. Like, what was wrong with me and, furthermore, Celia, my older sister, that we weren't worthy of keeping around. Like, there's that sort of stuff that you can't help but think about.
It does make me wonder if he did actually receive
me too.
those photos.
I'll never know.
Yeah.
I sent him a bunch of photos, and I sent him photos that I had photos of him that Sue had given me when he was a little bit younger. Because by the time I met him, he had a big burly beard, and he was really like big, like real cowboy guy, and he was already kind of old. He was an old man already. And so when I first saw these photos of him clean shaven in his 20s and 30s, it kind of blew my mind how similar we are. I mean, like, I'm a clone of the guy, even in body shape and body, like the way that we. So I had photos of him that were him standing in a way, and then a photo of me, that where I'm doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And so I like put those side by side, that kind of stuff. I sent him, again, to this day, I don't know if he ever got it. I actually have talked about it. I really would kind of like to find the letter that I wrote, because I'm sure I kept a copy of it, because I'm curious as to what I wrote now, probably a decade later. This was probably over a decade ago that I wrote that.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to like see what my thought process was in writing that, revisiting it. Hey everybody, I'm sitting down real quick with my good friend Zen Zenith. Hey Zen.
Where am I?
Where are you? You are on an episode of Elaborate in a fantastic little segment we call a commercial.
Oh, this is really nice. I like what you've done with the place.
Appreciate it. I try.
So I think I'm here to talk about my podcast.
You're here to talk about a fantastic show called The House Show Show.
Right. Yeah. So The House Show Show is the podcast I host. It's a live concert and event series. So the whole thing is recorded live. We have a little audience there. And what happens is I have guest singer-songwriters join me, and they play some songs in sort of an intimate setting. And I sit down and talk to them. And then we do a Q&A with the audience, and it's a lot of fun.
So it's like storytellers meets Unplugged meets a fantastic live podcast.
Right. It's like the Moth Story Hour meets Late Night with Seth, whatever his last name is.
Sure,
meets
awesome.
The Nerdist
I love
meets
it.
your favorite hang in your favorite living room.
And I am a massive music nerd. This totally speaks to me. There's nothing I love more than live music, and there's nothing I love more than live music in a really intimate setting. It really is a fantastic show, I must
Then
say.
you are going to love this. You can check it out online at thehouseshowshow.com, or we're also available on iTunes and Stitcher.
Fantastic, bud. I hope everybody checks it out.
Me too. That would be rad.
You had this relationship where your dad wasn't always around, but the time you spent was invaluable to you, and it shaped you.
Yeah, I treasured the time that I spent with my dad. And I still do. We went camping, and he used to tell me a story that he made up from off the top of his head before I went to bed.
Oh, really? So he was a bedtime story
Yeah.
improviser.
And he would what else? Like make my stuffed animals walk and talk. So all those things.
He's a character.
Yeah.
Your dad's a character.
He embraces when people describe him as quirky.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, he didn't have that growing up for at least a little bit of time. Do you think that affected the way he was towards you in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think it's I think the mothering that he received from his
Your
mother,
grandmother.
my grandmother, and the relationships that he had with his older sister. He always talks about
How interesting.
how he was putting on shows for the extended family with his sister. Like they would be like, oh yeah, we'd put on a show for and charge my own family members like 25 cents to go to the show.
That's cute. I love that I love that he was smart enough to charge him. Like,
Oh, yeah.
we're gonna get something out of this.
I mean,
deal.
I have to
There's
think
an ice cream truck coming.
I have to think that the charging part was probably my Aunt Chris's idea. I mean, he always felt like they were like Lucy and Linus Van Pelt.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great. How close are they? Are your dad and his sister in age?
I believe they're the same age distance between myself and my sister, which is
That's what I was getting
which
at.
is 3.5 years.
That's interesting. Do you think that you and your sister have the same relationship that he and his sister had?
we do not.
No.
No, my sister and I are close and we get along, but there is definitely there's different interests that
You guys
we have.
you guys are definitely opposites.
Yeah.
You're even opposites in personality.
Yeah. My sister embraced the older sister role of like, let's do this. This is my idea. And there was always I don't think a very fair power dichotomy.
Is she sort of a leader?
Yeah, she's definitely a leader, and she's very strong-willed, and I am much more of the like, okay, let's go with the flow because otherwise it creates drama.
Right.
And I still hold on to that in my life, but I think now whenever I go against the grain of something that my sister really wants to do, it's a huge deal. It's like,
Right.
no, you're supposed to listen to me. So I love my sister very much, and we get along, and I love being able to, when you have a sibling, watching them grow and watching
Sure.
the person that they become it's very rewarding.
Sure. Especially when you're
can
that
be,
close
rather.
in age. Especially when you're that
Yeah.
close in age.
Yeah.
See, I feel like I don't necessarily have that because my siblings were all so much older than me.
Mhm.
Wherever I am in life, they're always the same distance ahead. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, because when you're 3 years apart, you're kind of the same age for the most part.
Yeah, and that's
You know?
been hard for my sister to accept. Like when she's working in the office, and if her office crush is my age or younger, it's like
It's
like,
weird.
ooh, you're my brother's age. And it's like,
That's understandable. Because he traveled so much for his job, is he looking forward to retirement for the sake of being close to you?
I don't know. We haven't specifically talked about that. I think that he would love to do more traveling, and traveling with myself and traveling with my sister, I think is very rewarding to him.
Right.
To be able to do things that he couldn't do with us when we were children, like,
Yeah.
let's go to the spa, or let's, anything that two adults can do that he doesn't have to worry about, like,
Right.
oh, I have to make sure that Paul uses the bathroom before we do this. But he probably should, because I often forget to do that.
You are often constantly like, oh, we have to stop. I have to pee.
Yeah, we're thinking about a trip in the summer, actually.
Where you gonna
Or
go?
in the summer. We had talked about going to Spain and Morocco.
Are those two things that usually coincide with each other?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're across the Mediterranean Sea with
Gotcha.
it. Can you not envision where Morocco is?
No, I'm dumb.
So,
I got Spain, but Morocco is.
so Spain comes down to a point,
Yeah.
and Morocco is right on the other side of that point, and it's a very
Gotcha.
I believe it's the Isle of Rhodes,
Okay.
and it's people ferry across it all the time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And last time you guys went to Greece, you took a big long trip to Greece,
Yeah, we went to Greece, and Greece was fantastic.
especially as your aforementioned love for Greek mythology.
Oh yeah,
You guys probably really dove into that while you were there.
I knew I would enjoy it, but I didn't realize what a revelation it would be
Interesting.
in the understanding of Western civilization. And to see it
Wow.
in person, I think is so important to anyone who enjoys history or thinking about the past, because you will literally trip over the history that exists in Greece.
It's like literally,
Yeah,
there'll be a cobblestone that's older than your
Yeah.
great grandfather. That
we
you,
went to the site that had ruins, and like across the street was someone's farm, and there was a broken column, like ancient Greek column, in the middle of their field. Not part of the protected ruins.
right.
It's like, oh yeah, well, there's so many ruins that like,
That's just been there.
That's
for
just
God
there.
knows how long?
and that farmer's like, get this out of here.
It's a nuisance to him.
Yeah.
An invaluable piece of history, I'm sure.
A nice moment was that my dad said, I want to swim in the Libyan Sea while I'm here. The
Okay.
Libyan Sea is on the south side of Crete. We were staying in Heraklion and Kritsa, which are on the northern side of Crete.
Okay.
Crete is a very small island. And I said, oh, we could go to Malaya Beach in the south.
Right.
And he said, I don't know, it's sort of out of the way. And I was like, no, we should do this. It'll be fine. And I think he was still getting out of work mindset while he was there, because my dad is such a hard worker and is always thinking about work. And it's hard for him to stop thinking about work sometimes.
Right.
So we went to I'm butchering
Whatever,
it. It's
yeah.
a mullet. We went to the beach in the south that's facing the Libyan Sea.
Yeah, Mullet Beach.
Mullet Beach. And it was beautiful. It was maybe my favorite place in all of Greece that we went. Looking out at the beach, one side of it was the town. The other side, ancient Roman burial grounds that you can just swim over to, crawl into, and like fall asleep in someone's tomb if you want. Like
That's horrifying.
Yeah.
And
also beautiful though.
kind of beautiful. Yeah.
And he got to swim in the Libyan Sea, and it was a beautiful day. And I think that, I don't know, anytime as an adult you get to show to your parents, hey, here this is an adult decision that I am helping you make. And I think he turned to me and sort of gave me that look of like, I'm really glad you convinced me that we should do this.
Right.
And I like that.
That's nice. Like, so it was that sort of like, if you weren't there to urge it, it probably would have never happened.
Yeah.
Has your dad often that's an interesting, there's an interesting shift of sort of, I don't know if you want to call it power at that moment, but like generally the parent is the one that's like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And then like the parent is teaching the kid lessons.
Yeah.
And in any instant where a father could look to a son or a daughter, or mother to his daughter or son, you know, and just be like, thanks. Like, this was like, you did something for me. That's fantastic. Like,
I think of
it
it
was interesting
as,
to me.
I have a lot of memories as a young child holding my dad's hand and him guiding me to do something.
Okay.
And I think anytime the role reverses when you're an adult, where you're guiding your parents and doing something, I think that there's a sense of pride that they feel towards you then. That's
Sure.
There's no other feeling like it. I think I was just writing a screenplay recently where I had one of the characters divulge, is it weird to be an adult and still seeking your parents' approval?
No.
And the other character says, no, I don't think that ever goes
That's a
away.
human condition.
Yeah,
absolutely.
we want our parents to feel proud of us always. My mom actually set up an escape room for us to go to, or set it up. She she built
she
it.
built a escape room. Yeah.
No, but she found an escape room in Athens called Athens Clue. To this day, it's the best escape room that I've ever done, and it might be coded by the idea that it's the first
Right.
one I ever did.
Right.
But they run a tight ship over there. It's a
They
really
don't fuck around in Athens.
yeah. And so it was just the two of us, and it was
That's great.
and it was really appropriate too because it was the ruins of Knossos escape room,
Okay.
and we went to the ruins of Knossos in Crete already. So we're like, oh, we know.
So
this.
you know this?
yeah.
Oh, that's sweet.
But we did the escape room, and I think my production designer brain took over, and so I just sort of led the charge.
Right.
And my dad told me afterwards that it was so interesting and nice to see me just like he's like, I just followed your instructions throughout.
Right.
And again, it's
it's
for
like
lack
that
of a
sort
better term, power
shift.
where he's like, yeah, you knew what you were talking about. I'll follow the lead, and we both figured it out together, and we escaped the escape room, and it was really great.
It's very heartwarming. Just that sort of like, I'm going to essentially suppress every urge that I have as a parent.
Yeah.
As a parent, there's a pressure of like, I have to have the answers. I have to know. Like, my job is to protect and to guide and to teach. So when that shifts, like, it's got to be hard for them to let happen. But then when they let it happen, it has to be so rewarding. You have to assume. I mean, you and I sitting here as non-parents discussing this, but
Yeah.
do you remember the first like man-to-man conversation you had with your father?
No.
No?
I don't.
Because you guys have always spoke pretty openly with each other.
Yeah, I think that I also have two parents that are very open about everything. Like,
Right, yeah, that's true.
Case in point, after the escape room, him disclosing to me about how that
Right.
was such an interesting thing to watch me
Right.
take the lead. That's
And,
like,
and it didn't take a year and a half to
No.
tell you. Yeah.
and I think about like as a child, you know, the first time you get an erection, like my mom saying, or being like, "Mom, what's happening to my penis?" And she was like, "Oh, well, that's your penis getting is practicing so that it can have sex when you get older." Like she, like you know, like
that was the way she was,
nothing was sugar coated,
Right.
growing up. And I think that,
But with that said, it doesn't mean that it was cold. You guys still discussed your feelings, and you still discussed
I thought we were still talking
emotions.
about an erection there.
No.
Yeah, no, it's my dad is very affectionate,
Right,
and you know, maybe not. It's not a bad memory from Greece, but definitely it's something that I'm aware of. Is that my dad is still in shape, and certainly like I think he's a handsome man. Like
Yeah.
the two of us together
Right.
put in a like we're going to Santorini, which is like a honeymoon destination.
Right.
And I was like, I wonder how many people think that we're
you're
a
a
gay
couple.
couple right now, because you know, he will give you a hug, and
Yeah,
and
totally.
he's Italian. He'll give you like
Yeah.
like a kiss on the cheek. Like it's just
I mean, I think on the second time he met me, he like walked up and put his arm on my shoulder.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, like that's just his style, which is sort of my style as well. So I'm also a very affectionate guy.
yeah. I mean, he comes from a warm, affectionate Italian
Right.
background.
Yeah.
And it's just and I'm sort of, again, like what you get from your parents. Like
Yeah.
my mom's side of the family is less so. They're
Right.
my mom's
Cool.
family, I feel like is more. My mom's a genealogist, so it's
Right.
like we come from Mennonites, and
They're very. It's a little bit more clinical, or a
Yeah.
little bit more. Yeah, I get it. I'm a little jealous about you saying like, oh, I don't remember my first man to man, but simultaneously, I also value. Recently, I have to give credit to one of my, in my lack of fatherhood, or my lack of father having. What's the word I'm looking for? Sonship. Let's call it sonship.
sonship. I love those.
Right?
They're the healthy chip.
In that void, there did stand quite a few pillars. One being my older brother, another being my godfather, my Uncle Paul. My Uncle Paul was your father for me. He was that guy that I didn't see every day, but when I saw him, it was the best. He's that uncle who like knows a magic trick, and he's really funny, and he knows how to deal with children, but he's not condescending. Throughout my teen years, he taught me a lot about work ethic. And I mean, to this day, I kind of tout things that I got from him. Like, there's no point in touching it twice. Like little things, like little sayings that I remember him saying about like,
There's
when
no
you're
point
working.
in touching it twice. What does that mean?
I suppose I should supply some context. At that point, we were moving something. We were doing physical labor. And I was moving something to a specific spot to then be brought to a finishing spot.
Gotcha.
And I vividly remember him saying all day long, it's no point touching it twice. If you picked it up, you're holding it, bring it to where it's supposed to be, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He recently went through, him and my godmother kind of went through a separation, and it was very sort of shocking and difficult for me, especially because I was so far out of the loop being on the other side of the country and not knowing about anything that was happening. I literally didn't find out that she had left the house until almost a year later. Like, that's how out of the loop I was. And for the very first time ever, I got on the phone with my uncle, who he's always been the guy that's going to teach me something. And for the very first time in my life at 33 or 4, like, had a real man-to-man of like him getting emotional and talking about the love and talking about the relationship and just like talking to me about, in that instance, he wasn't just my uncle who was teaching me something or a father figure. He was just another man telling me about what he experienced and his feelings and even listened to me empathize about a situation that I'd lived, which I'll never group the two together as far as like being in a marriage for 30 some odd years and having 2 children together versus me being with somebody for a few years. But still, like, he was interested in hearing my point of view. And that was really very emotional for me and really sort of groundbreaking for me as far as like that shift.
I mean, as you're saying that, I'm thinking like, I do specifically remember when I was in college for the first time, him having a conversation with me where it felt like he was just like another male friend.
Right.
Like, and that was new. I think it took probably the distance of me being away at college.
Gotcha.
And then like at that point,
so you were able to kind of grow on your own a little bit.
He was able to, and also that I was 21 at least at that point. So we were able to sit in a bar together, and he knew I had dated women, so he knew that I had sex,
right.
Like these stepping stones.
Yeah,
towards
these sort of human experience stepping stones. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think maybe that's because I don't specifically remember those sorts of conversations in high school, which is entirely fair because I was very much not a man in high school.
Yeah, and I think
I mean, particularly like I was just a late bloomer.
Right.
In general. Like, I think maybe if I had sex in high school
right.
at some point, maybe he would have sensed that in me and we would have had
right.
a man-to-man talk.
Right.
Not that I believe having sex makes a person a man, but
I get what you're saying though.
Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't that semblance of like, I need to talk to him to make sure he's okay. Because there also is a little bit of that checking in, I'm sure, as well, in that part where him as a father, he wants to kind of know what you're doing to make sure that you're being safe and that you're being responsible and to make sure that you're not being destructive or that you're not doing things that are harmful to yourself or others, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Where I definitely felt like I remember those conversations with my uncle of just not necessarily sex talks, but more about that just sort of like, well, what are you doing with this and what are you doing with that? Oh, you got that car. Make sure you don't do this or that. Like that sort of like that little bit of fatherhood. Like, okay, I'm glad that you're doing your thing, but make sure you're doing it right. Like that sort of stuff. In any case, I appreciate you indulging my father talk. I feel like, again, all of those episodes I've had recently where it's come up over and over again, I felt maybe the listeners might be interested in hearing a little bit of my story and your stories. And I'm sure these facets of our lives will come up again, but what better time to talk about it than during the week dedicated to patriarchs and those who have spread the seed. At the end of all these episodes, I always tell the guests that I love them. I want to take the end of this episode to let you spread love for Pops.
Dad, if you're listening, I love you very much. Happy Father's Day.
Please follow Paul Bianchi on all the social medias at the Paul Bianchi. Make sure you're listening to Myth Understood on the Dragon Wagon Radio Podcast Network. As always, follow me on Twitter at Liquid Jake and at It's Dragon Wagon on all social media. Please send us an iTunes review. It's extremely helpful. And tell your dads you love them. Tell your moms you love them if they filled in as a dad, your aunts, your uncles, your brothers, whoever was your dad, regardless of the biology. Spread the love. Happy Father's Day to all of you incredible dads.
And may I extend that too. That just tell your family members that you love them at the end of every phone conversation. It's one of those things that like my family does, and it feels. Sometimes it feels a little bit like, oh, why are we even doing this? Because, like, of course, we know we love each other. But, it's a nice thing to hear.
You know what? And that's why every show ends the same way. Love you, Paul.
Love you, Jake.
Hey, everybody. I'm here with Cheryl Jones.
Hey,
You know what? I was thinking recently, there have been a lot of movies that have influenced me.
have there?
Yeah. If only there was a podcast that I could go on and talk about those movies that have influenced me most. What are your thoughts on this?
If only there was. Wait, I have one. I have Movies Made Me podcast, where we talk about the 5 movies that have influenced you to be who you are.
This sounds great. So you sit down every other week with a different guest and you dive into the 5 movies that were most influential for their lives.
Yes, anything that's really influenced them to be who they are.
This is great. How do people listen?
They can listen at mmmpodcast.com, iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Google Play Music.
You heard it here, folks. Tune in.
It's Dragon Wagon.